In this video, I'm going to give you 10 valuable practical advices to become a more tenacious defender at chess. And that's very important because it can happen that you're under pressure, your opponent tries to attack, and you have to hold on, you have to resist. And if that happens, your opponent will feel the tension as well. It will not be that easy to convert that advantage, and eventually you are the one to take over the initiative. So 10 practical advices to become better at defensive play, and of course a lot of more interesting content can be found on the channel as well. If you're an ambitious player, you will definitely like this video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and join the action now. We are going to have a look at the game between Ivan Ivanisevic and Boris Savchenko, played 2 years ago in pandemic times, online game. We are looking at the position from Black's perspective, as you can see from the current position, Black is under pressure. Why? Look at these pawns. They are dominating the center. They are depriving the Black pieces from moving forward. It's possible to make moves with Black, but White is in the driver's seat here. And White thought, okay, I have more space, my pieces are more active, let's go for a kingside attack. And White played here the move g2, g4. Very simple attacking play. There is this hook, and by challenging the pawn, White is hoping to open the files. Black decided to take the pawn because otherwise White is going to take, so it makes sense to take yourself. And now the most logical way of proceeding here would be just to recapture the pawn with the queen. The game goes on. White is better, but it's still a game. However, Ivanisevic decided, very typical through his playing style, he just decided to go for the move h5. And that is a very interesting moment. As White's plan is simple, just open the files towards the king. That's a typical attacking recipe. And how should you react here as Black? And well, there are a couple of advices, as I promised. I will give you them, not in specific order. But one typical thing to do is when you're under pressure, just take the material. Because now you do have the possibility just to take the knight on f3, which was played in the game. I will show you that if you're careless and would first take the pawn on h5, White has plenty of options, including to take with the rook. Now the two pawns in front of the king, they are no longer there. The g and h file, they are just open. And now the idea to take the knight on f3 comes too late, because here you see the files are open and White's strongest pieces are directed towards the Black king. Queen h6 is an idea. If you block now the g file with your knight, another huge blow here by White is rook takes g6. If you take with the f-pawn, then White has another interesting idea to include another attacker. With the move d6, you have a discovered check. The king can't go anywhere. After rook f7, it's queen takes f7 with checkmate. So in the game, g takes f3 was played. So we understand that Black goes for the material. And that's a good strategy, at least if your worst take off the opponent's attackers. So what is White going to do? Logically, you would expect that White is going to open the position. But now, if you would take on g6, removing that pawn, Black will recapture with a knight, bring new defenders towards the king side. So although there's not a pawn, these two minor pieces, the knight on g6 and the bishop on g7, they keep the g file closed. The queen is under threat, and Black will eventually survive. So instead, interesting idea by White here is not to take the pawn on g6, but the move h5, h6 was played. And this may come as a surprise to you, but very important, of course, always when you're on the defensive side, try to understand what your opponent is really trying to do here. White is a piece down, but he's attacking the bishop on g7. And now, obviously, if you're really stubborn and you would like to save your bishop by going back to h8, what is White's idea? It's to advance the pawn to h7 with check. If the king goes to g7, it's queen f6 with checkmate, as the rook protects the pawn, the queen gives check, the pawn on e5 protects the queen, it's checkmate. So you cannot allow the pawn coming to h7 if the bishop is on h8. That is too dangerous. What else can you do? Because you cannot do something else with your bishop. The bishop doesn't have a good square to go to. Even if you would decide to give back the bishop under favorable conditions, let's say with bishop takes e5, the plan is that after the bishop is gone, the black king may eventually be able to hide in front of white's passed pawn. But the problem is there's queen takes e5 with a devastating mating threat on g7. And if you play here the move f6 to prevent the queen from coming there, then the queen doesn't have to move, but instead there is this move d6 with another discover check. After the king goes away, you're able to take with the queen or the pawn eventually on e7, and white is winning material. This is completely winning. The second idea is that if you play here the move knight f5 instead of the move f6, protecting the g7 square, the queen cannot go there, but white has the move h7, checkmate with a pawn as the queen covers the two remaining dark squares of the black king. So that's also not possible. Then another idea, and very typical when you're on the defensive side, is give back material. So one idea could be here to play here straight away the move knight f5, allowing white to capture the bishop on g7. If you do recapture with the king, at least the knight covers the h6 square, so the white queen is not able to go there. But pause the video here for a second. You have an amazing move here as white to win the game. Interesting idea. It's an elimination of the main defender, as there is the move queen takes f5, with the point that if you do recapture with the g-pawn, it's rook d to g1. And once again, the files are open. The rooks are giving checkmate. The pawn on e5 covers the f6 square, so the king can't go there. So far we have seen only lines which are really convincing and leading to an immediate victory. Then my second, I've given already a lot of advices so far, but another important rule of thumb is not only to look at what your opponent is threatening. Look at candidate moves. We have seen already a number of candidate moves, how to save the bishop, how to give back the material, but also try to think how you're able to set up a counterattack, for instance, against white's most valuable piece, and that is the queen. And the key move here, the only move to stay in the game, is a brilliant move, g6, g5. Because obviously taking the pawn on g7 doesn't make much sense, because the queen on f4 will be hanging. Now, white has a number of moves, and we are going to discuss them one by one. But the first move we should look at is what happens if you just take the pawn on g5, solving the threat. And at the same time, we are setting up a threat against the bishop on g7. Now the idea for black, and there's not much else black can do here, is to play the move knight g6, stopping the mating threat. And here we see another very valuable tip, is that when you're on the defensive side, try to offer the exchange of queens. That can really help you to slow down the opponent's initiative. Keep in mind that black is a piece up. If white decides to move the queen away, we have time to save our bishop by taking on e5, for instance, because the knight and the bishop are both targeting that pawn. White has the choice, can exchange queens, but after rook takes d8, pawn takes g7, you can take the pawn on g7, or you can even take the pawn on e5. And here, the queens are off the board. The attack is over. And this is very nice defensive strategy. Succeeding in trading of queens will definitely help you to survive these sort of positions. So, after the move g5, queen takes g5 is not the most challenging way of playing, but there are different ideas. White can move the queen away, but where is the queen going to? Well, one very interesting line, which was not played in the game, but is the line I would like to discuss first, is the move queen h2. Why is the queen going so far away? These kind of backward moves are always difficult to find. But the idea is very simple. White's idea is to open up the h-file, and then if the h-file is open, the queen and rook are working nicely together and will be able to threaten checkmate. So here the question is, what are we going to do now? Keep in mind that bishop h8 is still not a possibility because of h7, king g7, and now it's queen h6 with checkmate once again. So we are no longer able to stick to our extra bishop. But that's not needed. What we have to do, and that's the most important thing, is make sure that the h-file will not be opened. Because if the h-file will be opened, for instance, we move the knight to g6, it's an h takes g7, attacking the rook, and threatening queen h7 with checkmate. King takes g7, queen h7 is checkmate. So that's also not possible. What else can we do? Keep the files closed. Make sure that this pawn from h6 stays on the board so that the white rook and the white queen are not able to infiltrate. The key move here, and that's also something very difficult to find, don't look at the obvious move. Look at the most bizarre moves in the position, especially when you're under pressure. Sometimes that can really help you. Keep the position closed. The only move here is the move bishop f6. How sick is this? You put a bishop on the square where it can just be taken with e takes f6, but then after knight g6, the knight is absolutely safe. This file remains closed, which means that after a check, we can always hide with our king in the corner. This pawn on h7 is working against white, and on the next move, queen takes f6 will be played. Black is wrapping up that valuable pawn. Eventually, Black may even start thinking about playing for an advantage. He has a number of pawns, his king is absolutely safe, and eventually these pawns on the king side, they may become assets as well. So queen h2 is a very interesting attempt, but it doesn't work out for white. Then, let's see what was played in the game. As in the game, the queen decided to go to a different square. Queen e4 was played so that the queen still supports the pawns on e5 and d5. Very important. And now it's up to black what to do with your bishop on g7. Still, this bishop doesn't have many great squares to go to, because one of the problems is that the queen is also controlling this diagonal. And we have ideas to go d6 to open up the diagonal for the bishop as well, and that means that well, things are really becoming problematic. For instance, if you would play bishop f6 here, I think one of the key moves, apart from taking the pawn with the pawn on f6, there is this idea to play a move like d6 as well, with the plan of taking next on f6. If the knight eventually comes to g6 very soon, it will be queen takes g6. So keep that in mind, that now with the queen on e4, the g6 square is not a stable square for the knight. So instead, black played here the move knight g6. The knight is going now trying to close the position. For instance, after h takes g7, we have king takes g7, and black is absolutely fine. The knight is a huge defender. White can take the pawn on f3, for instance, but now after queen e7, black consolidates its position. And on the next move, something like rook h8 can be played, trying to initiate the exchange of pieces, typical defensive strategy. Pawn on e5 can be taken soon, no problems whatsoever. But after the move queen e4, knight g6, white's idea is absolutely spectacular. White played here the move d6. So instead of capturing a piece on g7, instead white had the idea to break through via the center, opening up the d-file, so the rook maybe eventually join the attack. But most importantly, as I already said, this bishop is pinning the pawn on f7. If you take the pawn on d6, now it's queen takes g6, game over. The queen cannot be taken because of the pin. And on the next move, it will be queen takes g7 with checkmate. So that is the main problem black got to deal with, and it is shown in various lines. If you take the pawn on h6, queen takes g6, bishop g7, blocking the check, and now it's queen takes queen h7 with checkmate. Another line is if the bishop goes back to h8, safe square for the bishop, but once again it's queen takes g6, exploiting the pawn on f7, bishop g7, queen takes g7. It's all leading to checkmate. That means we have to come up with a very original solution. Knight takes e5, is that a possibility? Absolutely not. H takes, king takes, and now it's queen takes e5. White is a piece up with an ongoing attack. Then we need to find what is the key move, and maybe it's a move you have considered yourself as well. I have given this position to a lot of students of mine, and most of them were struggling to see the following move. But bishop takes e5 is the only way to stay in the game. And look what is going to happen now. We eliminate a very important pawn. White's idea is queen takes g6. And here a lot of people, they have seen queen takes g6. They think, oh, this is game over. The queen enters with check. We cannot take the queen. But wait a second. Let's always try to make things more concrete. And let's try to calculate. We have just given back a piece. If we go with our king into the corner, the king is safe. White doesn't have any reasonable checks at this point, and that means once again that the king is able to hide behind that pawn on h6. So the king is safe for the moment, no checks, but the queen is hanging, pawn on d6 is hanging, bishop takes f7 is played. And now let's dive into the action once again. What's happening here? White is capturing a valuable pawn, but there are no threats, so material is absolutely fine for black. It's black's turn. What would you play here? And what is difficult also from psychological point of view is that you have been facing a huge attack for a couple of moves. You have been under tremendous pressure, and asking my students what they would do here, most of them, they felt, okay, now it's time to offer immediately the exchange of queens. And few minutes ago, I just said that that's a good thing to do. When you're facing an attack, try to get rid of the most dangerous attacker of your opponent. Queen f6 is a possibility. However, after the exchange of queens here, maybe the bishop comes to d5. It's attacking the rook. Pawn on c7 is hanging. Maybe the pawn on f3 is hanging. Things are not clear. Maybe anything can happen here. But wait a second. If we realize that white doesn't have a threat, there's no need to panic. We can play here the move c takes d6, which was Savchenko's choice in the game. He's just calmly capturing a pawn. And that is very important, that you realize that your opponent doesn't have a threat. However, if you play here the move h7, white can really try to get rid of the pawn on h7 by, for instance, with a random move. White is about to go queen g8, and after rook takes g8 only move, it will be h takes g8, getting a new queen with double check, as both the queen, the new queen, and the rook on h1 are giving check. That is going to be checkmate. How are you going to deal with the mating threat? People focus on the mating threat right away. So people will think bishop g7 is the best move. It's a good move, and you're locking up the position, and you have control over the dark squares. There's nothing wrong with it. But the reason I'm showing you this is it's absolutely not needed to deal with the immediate threat of your opponent. In fact, a counterattack is a very important theme in such positions as well, especially in open games with open center or opposite castled kings. It's like giving punches to each other. And now it's black who can just play here the move queen c7. With a double attack, you're winning the bishop, and then it's absolutely game over. There are no more threats after that. That means that white will have to do something about it. Potential double attack. Should drop back with the bishop. It went to d5. But now after rook c8 check, king to b1, only now black offered the exchange of queens. The queen will have to go back because accepting the exchange of queens doesn't look very attractive at all. We have two extra pawns, and look at these pawns. They are coming forward. It's absolutely game over. In the game, Ivan Isaevich decided to go back with the queen to h5 to avoid the immediate exchange of queens. But after queen f5 check, king a1 only move, rook c2 was played. And now you see that with these three pieces, we just have a devastating attack. Once again, the pawn on h6 is just hindering white's attacking aspirations. And with the move bishop takes b2 on the agenda, it's game over. White resigned here, as the only way to defend the pawn on b2 is with the move rook to b1, but there's the move queen f6, increasing the pressure one more time against the pawn on b2, and white is unable to find another defender to help out, while at the same time there are absolutely no threats against the black king. So this is absolutely remarkable. If we go back to the starting position, this was move 20 of the game, and 10 moves later black managed to win it. This is something we absolutely didn't expect at all, but with a number of important rules like keeping the files closed, looking for counterattack, look at candidate moves, understanding your opponent's ideas. Of course, this will help you to anticipate the opponent's threats. And of course, also don't be afraid. If you think sometimes this looks dangerous, you still have to consider it seriously, because maybe it's the only move. Maybe you have to go for it. And eventually, if you are not afraid, you are able to take over the initiative, surprise the opponent, and with good calculation, with typical calculation techniques like looking for candidate moves, eliminating the possible options for your opponent, step by step you can find the right continuation, defend successfully, and eventually take over. As simple as that. Now, seriously, this is not easy at all, but you should try to study such kind of positions very carefully, and then you can see that you are able to become successful in defense, and that will bring you more points. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and very soon more this kind of stuff. See you soon.